The bustling terminal of New York International Airport was filled with its characteristic commotion. Travelers hurried in all directions, children dragging colorful luggage, business professionals intensely focused on their mobile devices while monitoring departure boards. Among this chaotic scene, one individual moved at an unhurried, almost meditative pace. She was dressed simply, a basic black t-shirt, well-worn denim jeans, and scuffed footwear. No luxury timepiece, no ostentatious accessories, no security detail clearing her path. This was Margot Robbie. Several passers-by gave her curious glances, momentarily uncertain. A question, could that really be her, seemed to cross their minds. Most, however, failed to recognize the actress. She blended with other travelers, perhaps even appearing somewhat out of place in such an upscale environment. One detail, however, distinguished her understated appearance. Around her left wrist was tied a thin red string bracelet. The vibrant crimson thread stood out against her skin, modest yet somehow significant. There was a certain weight to this simple accessory that transcended its physical presence. Margot proceeded without pretension, without concealment, simply existing as himself. Upon reaching the first-class gate, she joined the priority queue and presented her boarding pass to the attending staff member. Her name was clearly visible on the ticket. The uniformed woman who received her boarding pass, her posture impeccable, her appearance flawless, her gaze penetrating, hesitated momentarily. "Mrs.," she began, examining the ticket before returning her attention to her, her brow slightly furrowed. "I believe you may be at the incorrect gate. This line is reserved for first-class passengers." Margot showed no sign of offense or surprise. She simply responded with a tranquil smile, "I'm at the correct gate." The attendant, whose name tag identified her as Carla, verified the ticket once more. It was indeed valid, and the name matched. She recognized who Margot Robbie was, naturally, but hadn't immediately identified her. Her casual attire, worn footwear, and complete absence of celebrity presence didn't align with her typical first-class passenger profile. Even after confirming her identity, she remained hesitant. An unconscious bias had already manifested. She permitted her to proceed, but her gaze followed her with discomfort. She walked unhurriedly down the jetway and settled into her first-class accommodation with the ease of someone experienced with such travel. Carla continued observing her. Something about her presence disturbed her equilibrium. Perhaps it was the contradiction, simplicity where she anticipated extravagance. Or perhaps it was the red string bracelet, now fully visible as she fastened his safety belt. She paused momentarily. Her focus fixed on that small red thread, and tension visibly crossed her features. Though she remained silent, she stepped forward. Then again. She followed her down the aisle with determined, almost rehearsed movements. Her expression had transformed, becoming more tense and deliberate. Something within her had shifted. The aircraft's steady hum created an almost therapeutic atmosphere. As the plane ascended steadily into the sky, the world below transformed into a landscape of clouds and sunlit rooftops. Within the first-class cabin, the air was precisely temperature-controlled and refreshing. The lighting was dim just enough to suggest comfort without inducing sleep. Margot remained motionless in her seat, arms resting on the padded supports, her breathing measured and calm. He wasn't engaged with reading material or entertainment options. She was simply present. In this quietude, his presence commanded more attention than any disruption could have achieved. The red string bracelet on her wrist had shifted slightly during takeoff, now resting prominently in view against her plain black attire. It wasn't bold or pristine. In fact, it appeared somewhat aged, frayed at the edges, as if it had accompanied him through countless experiences. Yet, that simple thread carried more significance than most could comprehend. Carla noticed. From her position in the galley, she peered into the aisle, just enough to maintain visual contact. Something about his demeanor, so serene, so centered, so unapologetically authentic, created discomfort for her. Yet she couldn't articulate why. She had previously interacted with celebrities, demanding ones, entitled ones, boisterous ones. But Margot defied these categories. Nevertheless, something about her, or perhaps about that bracelet, stirred an inexplicable unease within her. A feeling she couldn't name. Moments later, she approached. Her bearing was professional, calculated. She had perfected this poise through practice, through training sessions, through mental rehearsal before confronting situations. This wasn't merely a flight, it was her domain. And she was resolved to maintain its order. "Mrs., she began, lowering her voice slightly. "I should remind you that we observe certain protocols regarding overt symbolic expressions in communal areas. Particularly in this cabin, we request discretion." Margot turned toward her unhurriedly, her expression unreadable. "I apologize, have I violated a regulation?" Her tone remained soft, but with a sharpened undertone. "It's not about violating regulations, it's about fostering a neutral environment. Some passengers might find certain symbols divisive." She glanced briefly at the red string. "I've traveled this way numerous times before. No one has ever expressed concern." She hesitated. Her response wasn't what she had anticipated. "Yes, well, perspectives are evolving. Some travelers experience heightened sensitivity these days. We simply ask everyone to exercise consideration. Perhaps you could conceal it." Her hand gestured vaguely toward the bracelet, as if reluctant to indicate it directly, as though the symbol might cause her harm upon contact. Margot didn't respond with anger, but neither did she comply. "This red string isn't a fashion statement or a provocation. It's an integral part of my identity." Carla forced a smile, the kind used to diffuse tension rather than establish connection. "Of course, and we respect that. We simply request that passengers keep personal expressions discreet, especially in premium cabins." Her words, though couched in policy, carried a passive-aggressive edge. The woman seated across the aisle looked up, subtly engaging with the interaction. A man 2 rows behind removed one earbud. The atmosphere had transformed. Something uncomfortable had begun to materialize, not loud or chaotic, but palpable. Margot's voice remained steady, controlled. "With all due respect, I believe I'm being singled out." Carla blinked. "Excuse me? If another passenger wore a pendant depicting a tree, a star, or a stone, would you request they conceal it?" She opened her mouth, closed it, recalibrated. "That's not what this concerns." "Then what does it concern?" Silence. She offered no answer. Instead, she cleared her throat, stepped backward with a nod and said, "I'll give you a moment." Margot looked up again, more deliberately this time. "This red string has preserved my life more than once. In conflict zones, in hospital rooms, during nights I feared I wouldn't survive. I won't conceal it, not now, not ever." Her voice didn't increase in volume. But it filled the space like thunder reverberating through a cathedral. For the first time, Carla revealed her authentic emotions. Her frustration, her disbelief, these emotions breached the veneer of her customer service expression. It was merely a momentary lapse, but it was evident, and everyone witnessed it. Passengers turned. The energy had fully transformed now, no longer uncertain. People began forming silent judgments. A man raised his phone from his lap, directing the camera discreetly toward the aisle. Another whispered to his companion, "Is that truly Margot Robbie?" But Margot remained oblivious to this shift. She wasn't attempting to create one. She was simply maintaining a boundary that others had presumed flexible. Carla, sensing her diminishing control, straightened her posture once more. "If you refuse, I'll need to escalate this matter to the captain." "Do what you must," her gaze met hers now with quiet resolve. "But understand this, the issue isn't what's on my wrist. It's what's in your perception." A silence so absolute descended upon the cabin that it might have been the vacuum of space. Even Carla retreated slightly. Even she experienced it, not merely the impact of the words, but the truth they contained. Carla attempted to speak but found no words, and everyone recognized this fact. The aircraft had reached its cruising altitude. Outside, clouds drifted languidly beneath the wings. Inside, the first-class cabin hummed with subdued luxury, reclining seats, champagne flutes, the occasional sound of cutlery against fine china. But one section of the cabin reverberated with a different energy, the aftermath of a confrontation no one had expected to witness. Margot remained seated in silence, unmoved. The red string bracelet still adorned his wrist, resting peacefully above her pulse point. Carla returned. Her movements, now more rapid and rigid, carried a new intensity. She halted beside her seat, lips compressed, expression neutral. But this time, there was no attempt to disguise the tension in her tone. "Miss, I've received several comments from other passengers. Some are experiencing discomfort." She spoke with that same carefully measured cadence, one that attempted to sound impartial but couldn't quite conceal its underlying sentiment. Margot regarded her calmly. "Regarding what?" Carla paused. The answer was self-evident, but she hesitated to articulate it directly. "Regarding the display of symbolic items in a shared and enclosed environment. We strive to maintain a space where everyone feels at ease." Margot didn't flinch. "A symbol of personal belief creates discomfort." Carla inhaled. "Short, sharp. Consider if everyone began displaying political badges, religious emblems, ideological statements. It would foster division in an environment intended for unity." She leaned forward slightly. Her voice remained low, but now it carried gravity, a deliberate clarity. "Then perhaps the issue isn't the symbol. Perhaps it's what people have been conditioned to feel about it." Her words resonated more powerfully than her voice. A couple seated nearby exchanged glances. The man subtly adjusted his phone, activating the recording function without drawing attention. Carla, noticing this, straightened her posture, as if attempting to re-establish authority through physical bearing. "I'm merely adhering to protocol. If you decline to cooperate, I may need to alert security." This statement captured attention. More heads turned. A quiet hush spread across the cabin, the kind that emerges when something authentic, something raw, penetrates the surface of routine. But Margot remained composed. She didn't raise her voice. Instead, she met her gaze and stated, "Contact whoever you deem necessary, but understand this, the problem isn't what adorns my wrist. It's what resides in your perception." Silence. Complete. Carla stared at him, caught in the sudden mirror he presented. Not with judgment, but with clarity. His words weren't aggressive. They were truthful, and that made them more difficult to accept. A flight attendant further back suspended her task mid-motion. The couple continued recording. One or two passengers subtly nodded, though they remained silent. A division was forming, but not between beliefs or ideologies. It was between perception and reality. Carla retreated without speaking, jaw tensed. She didn't yet realize, but the tide had begun to shift. The atmosphere in the first-class cabin had transformed. What began as subtle tension had evolved into something weightier, more charged. The kind of unspoken shift that caused people to sit more upright, whisper less frequently, observe more attentively. Margot continued to sit quietly in her assigned space, the red string bracelet on her wrist, undisturbed and visible. Not as a statement, but as a truth. It hadn't moved. She hadn't moved, but everyone around her had. Carla stood in the galley, arms crossed, jaw tense. She was no longer merely irritated. She was challenged. Her authority had been quietly questioned before the very passengers whose respect she was trained to command. She could sense judgment from multiple directions, not only from Margot but from her own colleagues, and possibly from herself. Her fingers tapped against the tablet secured to her service cart. The uniform she wore suddenly felt heavier than usual, constricting around the collar. She inhaled deeply, then pivoted sharply. "Nicole, I need your assistance at the front." The younger attendant looked up, uncertain. "Is everything all right?" Carla offered a tight smile that wasn't genuinely a smile. "We have a situation I prefer to address according to protocol. Passenger 3A is refusing to comply with a direct request. I'm escalating the matter." Nicole appeared hesitant. "Is it concerning the bracelet?" Carla didn't respond directly. "It's about establishing precedent." Nicole followed reluctantly. Back at Margot's row, several passengers pretended to attend to their own activities, eyes on reading materials or screens, but attention elsewhere. One man near the bulkhead continued recording discreetly with his phone resting on the armrest, positioned just adequately to capture the seat across the aisle. Carla returned to Margot's side. Her stance more inflexible than before. Nicole stood just behind her, silent, observing. "Mr. Robbie," Carla announced, louder this time, using his full name now that she had finally recognized his identity. "I'm informing the captain. If you persist in disregarding cabin expectations, we will need to implement further measures, potentially involving airport security upon landing." Margot slowly redirected her attention to her, unperturbed. "For wearing a bracelet?" Carla's complexion flushed. "For refusing crew member instructions during an active flight." The words sounded official, rehearsed, but they resonated as inauthentic in the quiet space. More passengers were visibly attentive now. There was no commotion, no raised voices. Just the unmistakable sense of a confrontation deepening and the possibility that something significant was at stake. Nicole spoke gently. "Perhaps we should consult with the captain together before proceeding further." Carla directed a sharp, disapproving look at her. But it was too late. The moment had shifted. Carla had attempted to wield authority, but what she had revealed instead was control slipping away. The cockpit door opened 5 minutes later. Captain Morales emerged, composed, mid-50s, face weathered but kind, the sort of individual whose calmness was palpable before he even spoke. He traversed the aisle purposefully, but without haste. Upon reaching the galley, Carla stepped forward, speaking rapidly. "Sir, we have a passenger refusing to comply with basic decorum. I've requested multiple times that she conceal a symbolic item that could disturb the cabin atmosphere. She declined. She's escalated the situation." Morales listened without interrupting, then turned to Nicole. "And what's your perspective?" Nicole hesitated. "She's quiet, respectful. She didn't escalate anything. She simply didn't wish to hide her bracelet." Morales nodded, then entered the aisle. All eyes followed him. He approached Margot calmly, hands behind his back like a professor preparing to address a thoughtful student. "Mr. Robbie, I'm Captain Morales. I understand there's been some disagreement regarding policy. I want to ensure the well-being of everyone on board, crew and passengers included. May I request your account?" Margot looked up, expression still composed, voice steady. "Your attendant asked me to conceal this." He touched the red string lightly, suggesting it might cause others discomfort. "I declined." A pause. "I explained that this bracelet has been significant throughout my life, that it's not an ideological symbol but one of survival, a personal faith that sustained me when nothing else could. I don't wear it to provoke. I wear it because it reminds me I've endured." The cabin had become so still that you could hear the distant click of a seatbelt fastening 3 rows away. Captain Morales listened. And when Margot concluded, he didn't respond immediately. Instead, he looked back at Carla. His voice was low but firm. "Did he express anything disrespectful?" Carla opened her mouth, but words failed her. He turned to Nicole again. Anything aggressive? Nicole shook her head. No, sir. Captain Morales exhaled, the weight of leadership settling into his subsequent words. The cabin lights had dimmed, but for Carla, there was no respite. She stood at the rear of the aircraft, concealed behind the galley curtain, her phone vibrating incessantly in her pocket. She hadn't checked it in the past 10 minutes. She didn't need to. She already knew. The video had become viral. Her face, her voice, her words, the manner in which she instructed Margot Robbie to hide her red string bracelet. All of it was now online, being scrutinized by strangers worldwide. Her chest constricted, not with panic, but with something deeper, shame, though not because of the backlash, but because now she perceived it too. The incident replayed in her mind, not from her perspective, but from everyone else's, from Nicole's, from the passengers, from Margot's. She hadn't been impartial. She hadn't been equitable. She had judged him silently, politely, professionally, and that made it worse. A memory surfaced, her grandmother's voice, gentle and weathered. Kindness isn't what you express. It's what you choose not to conceal. Carla had dedicated her entire life to concealment, behind policies, behind protocols, behind control. Now, there was nowhere to hide. From the cockpit came Captain Morales's voice over the intercom. This airline is committed to respect, inclusivity, and the freedom to express one's personal beliefs without fear or shame. It was subtle, but clear. Everyone understood its meaning. Margot remained seated quietly in position 3A, still composed, the red string bracelet still visible. She hadn't gloated. She hadn't retaliated. And somehow, that caused more discomfort than if she had. Carla wiped beneath her eyes and drew an unsteady breath. She wasn't certain what she would say, but she knew she needed to confront the situation. She emerged from the galley. The journey to the front seemed longer than usual. Aisle illumination reflected off polished seats and curious gazes. As she neared Margot's row, the cabin descended into silence. He regarded her, tranquil as ever. She halted before her. Words failed her. And so, she allowed her physical actions to communicate. Carla slowly lowered herself to kneel. Gasps interrupted the silence. "I was mistaken," she said softly. Her voice trembled. "I convinced myself I was protecting the cabin environment, that I was being professional, but I was merely protecting my own discomfort." Tears formed in her eyes. "I've hidden behind neutrality throughout my life. I thought it provided strength, but it merely rendered me blind." She looked up at her. "I apologize." Margot didn't speak momentarily. Then gently, she stood and extended her hand. She accepted it. She assisted her to rise with quiet dignity. The applause subsided. The moment lingered. Carla remained standing before Margot, still affected, but transformed. Open in a way she hadn't been since first donning the uniform. She felt vulnerable, seen, yet strangely unburdened. Margot continued holding her hand, not to emphasize a point, simply to offer presence. Carla whispered, almost to herself. "I don't know how to undo my actions." Margot regarded her with compassion. "You don't need to undo them." She released her hand gently. "You confronted them. That exceeds what most ever achieve." She blinked. The cabin remained quiet, still observing. But now, no one appeared to be judging her. They seemed moved. Margot gestured to the seat beside her. "Sit. If you wish." Carla nodded, seated herself momentarily. Her posture no longer rigid, no longer performing. "I once believed in something," she said quietly, "before this occupation, before rules and scripts and apprehension." Margot chose grace over conflict, quiet faith over loud pronouncements, authentic truth over convenient lies. The flight attendant apologized mid-journey, and the world observed. But Carla wasn't concerned about the articles, because something else had transformed within her. 2 weeks later, soft, natural light streamed through the window of a modest apartment. Carla sat before her phone, recording a video. No cosmetics, no uniform, just herself in a simple t-shirt. On her wrist, she wore a small red string bracelet, the one Margot had given her after the flight, the one she had worn throughout the ordeal. She looked into the lens. I spent years believing professionalism meant concealing my authentic self. She glanced down at the bracelet. But this reminded me what it means to be human. She smiled. Today, I no longer hide, she paused. Thank you, Margot. She ended the recording, and for the first time in many years, she felt complete. The camera stopped recording. She remained seated in silence, still touching the red string, not as a symbol of belief, but as a reminder of courage, of grace, of the power of choosing kindness over control. Thank you for watching. I hope you all enjoy this video, and learned a lesson. I would be grateful for your likes. Also don't forget to subscribe and comment on the video. See you soon.